Native Americans? Yeah. You knew my slideshow, didn't you? Yeah, so a lot of times you think Native Americans or hunting is often associated with tracking. So these are kind of some of the first trackers that we had out at Craters of the Moon. And so this is a picture of the Shoshone Indians. We also have the Bannock that came in seasonally to the park. But in particular, they didn't live out here. We know that they hunted. They came out here seasonally to hunt and to look for some of these animals, to track some of these animals. And so what we find, some of the artifacts that we'll find in these areas is hunting blinds. So you can kind of see a little bit of that half crescent-shaped rock ring, and that's a hunting blind. That's going to be near a lot of the migration routes from some of those grazers that are traveling through the park. So we know that there was tracking going on here early on, and we also find some arrowheads and other signs of hunting in the park. So these are some of the first sort of trackers that came around to create first human trackers that were in Craters of the Moon. So how many of you guys would think you're a tracker? Show of hands, anyone? What? Okay, so I'm going to make the argument that I think all of us can be considered trackers. So tracking is essentially a combination of two things. It's combining what you sense, using your senses, and combining it with information you already know. So what do you already know about an animal or a place, and then combining it with what you sense. So let's say you hear somebody cough down the hallway. You're actually kind of tracking that in a sense, where you're listening to that cough, you hear it, but you can decipher, are they coming down with the flu? Are they getting sick? Are they choking on something? Or is it simply just a cough? You're combining that sound that you hear with information you already know. Parents are always tracking their kids. Are they safe? Are they hungry? Is everyone okay? So we kind of track naturally in our day-to-day lives. Maybe not in the specific sense of the word, but we can all kind of use some of those ideas of what maybe we don't consciously realize we're doing and use it to kind of look for wildlife out in the park. So my favorite quote about tracking is from a man who wrote probably one of the best books on tracking, and he said that it is kind of a meeting place between storytelling and science. So science is that background knowledge. It's what you already know. Where do animals like to go? What do they like to eat? What habitat are they in? What are their tendencies? But then you're also creating a story. You're picking up clues, you're using your senses, you're weaving together all of these pieces to create this story, to solve this puzzle of the animal, to kind of get inside its head. Where is it going? What is it doing? So between the two of that, science and storytelling, that's kind of the combination, that's that midpoint of tracking, being able to look for an animal. So a lot of times when you're out and about, if you do get the chance to see an animal, this is often what you see. It's sort of running away from you. It's noticed you and it's off heading in the other direction. So sometimes you're lucky enough to spot wildlife in a park or while you're out hiking, but a lot of times you don't get the chance to actually see a bear or any of those larger animals you're looking for. So tracking can be a really great way to connect to wildlife without maybe seeing them or without getting too close. Tracking is just a good way to notice signs of wildlife. None of us are really ever going to be expert trackers, but a lot of us, I assume, like to go on hikes, being outdoors, and so this is a good way to notice signs of life around you. When you're going out on a hike, do you see any prints? Do you see anything around you? It's a good way to kind of connect to wildlife without physically connecting or without seeing them in front of you. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at tracking. Paw prints is often one of the things people first think of. That's just those original tracks in the ground. Gait is something that is kind of the spacing between all of those tracks. So that spacing can tell you a lot about what the animal's doing. Are they running? Are they walking? Are they injured? Are they stalking prey? You can kind of tell a lot by the spacing between those paw prints. Scat is a good one, especially when you're trying to figure out how fresh tracks are. Sound. A lot of animals you will hear before you see them. And then vegetation marks. This one's often forgotten, but this is a really good one if you can't actually find tracks. Noticing animals' marks, essentially on the plants and any of those trees around you. And we have a bat flying through. We've got a lot of juveniles out tonight, so just stay calm, and if they land, just let them be. They'll fly off, I promise. They should just kind of be looking for bugs. This light attracts all the bugs, so they're cruising around. And getting quite close, all right. Obviously, my bat calls have been working. I brought them to the amphitheater tonight. You're welcome. Like, no, I'm just kidding. All right. All right, so there's a lot of different things, a lot of signs you can look for animal life. But we're going to talk about tonight is first we're kind of going to look at some tracks you might see on a normal basis, on a day-to-day basis? What are the tracks you're going to come in contact with? The second thing is we're going to look at some of the animals that resource team, all the folks in the park who are in charge of taking care of and protecting the resources, how do they track and monitor animals? And then how do we look for animals that don't leave tracks? In case you haven't noticed, a lot of this is lava rock, so how do we find signs of this animal life without seeing tracks? What other marks can we find in the environment? So we're going to start off by talking about some of the animals you might see on a day-to-day basis. We have a couple canines in the park. Most likely to see a red fox up here. Every once in a while we have some coyote sightings in the area. Very rarely on a wildlife cam in the north end we get a picture of a wolf coming through the area. So probably not going to happen down here, but every once in a while. Some of the felines that we have, cougar, that's also taken by our wildlife cam in the north end. So you almost never see them down here, and most people can't actually get a photo of them. It's the wildlife cam. But in the winter, probably going to see some bobcats coming through the area. We find a lot of bobcat prints in the snow. So you guys see cougars and foxes on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, you might. No, not a dry Tortuga. So. But you probably see cats and dogs on a day-to-day basis, canines and felines out there. So we're going to kind of look at some of the paw prints of these cats and dogs and try to tell the difference between those. How do you look for different signs when you're looking at the print in front of you? So we're going to start off with a true or false question. So true or false, the front paws of cats and dogs are smaller than their hind paws. What do you guys think? We have some trues, falses, and split, false. You think a false? Well, you are absolutely right. It's because you came to the Junior Ranger program, wasn't it? So it's actually false. So their front pads on cats and dogs are typically larger than their hind pads. A little bit more spread out and sometimes a bit longer with most canines and felines. So we're going to kind of go through how to look at some of the differences between cat and dog prints. So this is a dog print. So the first thing you want to do when you see a print is you want to put a shape on top of it. So you want to draw basically a shape around the whole thing. So what do you guys see right there? Yeah, so you got an oval on top of them. Dogs are often with a very nice oval pattern on top of the print. The second thing that I like to do is I like to look at the negative space. So the negative space is basically the space in between all of the pads on the print. So right around here, all that white mark, basically, where it didn't leave a mark. And so with dogs, you can actually draw a nice X over the top of their heel pad. So you can draw a really good X that comes through that area. So you're going to see that on most canine prints. It's going to be a really good distinguishing feature. What do you guys see there? Yeah, they can't retract their claws. So you're often going to see, well, you should see claw marks on most canines. On the top of their heel pad, it often indents into the print, into that negative space. On the bottom of their heel pad, there's going to be basically two distinct lobes. So a left and a right lobe, pretty distinct on their own on those dog prints. And then lastly, their top prints, basically the top two toes, they're going to be pretty parallel to each other. They're going to have kind of a nice parallel line running through those top two front toes. So we're going to talk a little bit about cat print because they can be kind of different. So what sort of shape could you draw on top of the cat print? Yeah, so you can put a nice circle on top of the cat print. And then what about that X? Can you draw an X on top of the pad? Yeah, so you can't really draw an X on there, so you know it's definitely not a canine. But cats have what we call a negative space that looks like a C. So a lot of times we kind of call it a C, where the tops of those toes stick out a little bit and make kind of arc around the heel pad. So they have a nice C shape in that negative space. What's missing? Yeah, they can retract their claws, so you almost will never see claw prints on cat prints, or claw marks on a cat print or a cat track. This isn't always true, but a lot of times cats will indent a little bit, kind of back into the heel pad on their track. What's different about this one? Yeah, you're going to see 3 pretty defined lobes down there instead of 2. And then what about that? Is that parallel? Are their top 2 toes parallel? Yeah, so cats are interesting because they have what we call a leading toe. And so if you guys hold your hands out in front of the screen and you tuck your thumbs underneath, so you just have those 4 fingers showing up. Do you have one finger that's taller than all the others? Now, you don't have to point it up at me, but can you see one finger? Okay, so with cats, you can actually tell whether it's a left or a right paw print. So what do you guys think? Is it left or a right print? Yeah, it's a left print. So if you hold out your left hand, you're going to see your middle finger. That's the tallest one. And so you can tell that second one in from the left, that's going to be the lead toe. So sometimes it's kind of confusing with the left and right, so I always put my hands out. And you can kind of figure out if it's a left or a right print.
So you can't tell with the dog though, right?
Nope, because they're parallel. Yep. All right, so ready to play cat versus dog? I'll show a slide, and you guys shout out if you think it's a cat or a dog. All right, so these are all in the park, so they're not the best photos, but we'll do what we can. Yeah, and why do you think it's a cat? Yeah, we got 3 lobes.
Leading toe.
It's a right or left print. Yeah, and you got a nice circle. This is a little harder to see. Yeah, you can see the toenail. So you don't quite see it defined its own nail, but you can see that it comes to a point. So it's probably a good indication that it has a toenail. Yeah, especially in the snow, sometimes it'll already make the shape for you, so you can see a pretty nice circle around it. This one's a little bit harder, so we don't have the full print, right? So that's why you have to have a couple different things to look for when you're looking at a print. Because you don't always have this perfect, nice marking. So we'll start by, look, this is a heel pad right here. And I can kind of see an X that looks like it's over here. So I'm thinking maybe dog, it's got an X, and then you see kind of these dots up here. So my thinking is that those are probably the nails coming in, and just the rest of the pad staying marked. And so if you include that, then you got a nice circle. So with the X and the nails and that oval on top of it, you kind of get a hunch it's probably going to be a canine print. This one's actually just a dog print. It's taken on some new cement some neighbors nearby just put down. All right, what is this? All right, what kind of really cool, awesome cat do you think this is? Yeah, it's a house cat. So a lot of times people ask, how do you tell the difference between a domestic cat, a bobcat, a lynx? Basically, yeah, exactly, size. There are slight differences in the spacing, but essentially you just want to measure the height and the width. A house cat's going to be barely an inch, maybe a tiny bit over, and then bobcat, lynx, cougar as well. And you can kind of see the comparison between that circle shape of the cat and then that more narrow oval shape of those canines. So basically just size. Getting out the measurement of the height and width is going to tell you a lot about it. All right, so did any of you guys see any of these animals in the park? Yeah. They're a little rare. I don't know if you had a chance. All right, so up here we've got a red squirrel. We've got a chipmunk down here. And then we've got this critter over here. Do you guys think he's a chipmunk or a squirrel?
Squirrel.
Oh, we got it. It's actually a ground squirrel. So a lot of times they're pretty similar to chipmunks. They're often bigger, but let me tell you, in the campground, you might have seen some pretty ginormous chipmunks running around the area. So a good way to tell is just to look at their face. So this picture is kind of the two of them facing off. The golden mantle ground squirrel will have a nice golden mantle. There won't be any stripes on its face. The chipmunk is going to have those black and white stripes that come all the way up past the eye into the nose. So you can tell chipmunk by the stripes on its face. And then the ground squirrel over here, you can see it's just mostly golden on the head and the neck. So how many toes are in their tracks? So A, 4 in the front, 4 in the back. That's kind of like those cat and dog prints we just saw. B, 5 toes in the front, 5 toes in the back. C, 6 toes in the front, 6 toes in the back. D, 4 toes in the front and 5 toes in the back. What do you guys think? B, maybe?
C.
You gotta have a C in there somewhere, right? They're too close to INL, I guess. Everyone's not really sure. Okay, well the answer is actually D. So they've got 4 toes in the front and 5 toes in the back. So they actually have a fifth toe, they have a vestigial thumb, but it's very, very short. It doesn't actually make that marking when they're running across the ground. Okay, hello. Stand out of the way of the light a little bit. All right, so this is a pretty good print. You can see right here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 back there. But wait a second, I thought you said 4 toes in the front and 5 toes in the back. What's going on here?
It's probably touching.
Exactly, so their gait, so the pattern in which they're walking and running and making those imprints on the ground. So with squirrels and chipmunks and actually several other animals in kind of this group, they land a little bit differently when they're running or when they're walking. So you can see this little tiny print, those are their front paws, and they land down first. And then these bigger ones are their back feet, and their back feet actually will come up in front and land in front of their front feet. So with these animals, you're actually gonna, when you look at a track, you'll see the back feet first and then the front feet. And so sometimes knowing how many toes they have can help you kind of figure out what sort of animal it is and kind of what's going on with the gait. So if it is a tree dweller, oftentimes that's what their tracks are gonna look like, where they have 5 toes up here and 4 left. Land dwellers, their front feet sometimes rotate back and forth. So if you guys are interested in checking out some permanent tracks of these, if you head out to Devil's Orchard, you might find some permanent tracks because we had a critter, unfortunately, run across through as it was still wet. So if you're interested in actually seeing these tracks, these real life tracks in the park, they will be there for another couple of years. So check them out. If you don't get a chance to head out to Devil's Orchard, they leave a lot of vegetation signs around the park. What do you think they are eating out here besides campground leftovers that we don't want to feed but actually get out? Yeah, nuts and pine cones. So if you see a pine cone that's been completely obliterated into a million pieces and all you've got left is this little core, you know a chipmunk or a squirrel has been in the area. Sometimes some of those tree-dwelling squirrels, like our red squirrels or our chicories, they'll collect pine cones and put them in little holes. But usually, you're going to find a lot of this out in the park. And you know that there's going to be a chipmunk or squirrel that's been in that area. So some of the next animals that we have in the park are our larger grazers. We have a lot of deer that come through this area, and that was some of the animals that the Shoshone people were hunting. So true or false, the mule deer that we have out here, or the black-tailed deer, were named for the size and the shape of their ears. I'll show you a picture and we'll see if we can figure it out. Yeah, so they've got pretty big ears, and they're also called black-tipped deer, or black-tailed. Yeah, black-tailed because they've got just kind of a tiny little, look like their tail is dipped in black paint a little bit. We call them mule deer out here, and because they have those giant ears. Ears have a great network of veins, so it can actually help cool themselves down a little bit, and they can hear across very flat plains for a long area. So these ones are going to be the most likely tracks you're going to find out in the park. They walk across a lot of the cinders, because the cinders is going to contain most of the vegetation. So this was taken on Broken Top Loop Hike. You can see there's a couple series of them. There's usually several of them traveling along. And so it's a great way to kind of see some of these deer trails in the park if you don't get a chance to see them in the morning or at dusk. The other thing is if you see a lot of scuffles, you can't make out any prints, just pull back and look up a little bit. If you're looking close, they're hoofed animals, so they're going to have kind of those 2 prongs coming away. But just pull back and look up as you're driving through the park, because you're going to see deer trails all over this area. So just look across those cinders. So you can see all these tiny little footpaths everywhere. And you don't really notice them unless you're looking for them. So especially if you go out to Broken Top or the Tree Molds parking lot, as you're driving back, trying to come back onto that loop road, look up on the back of Inferno, because you're going to see all these tiny little paths shooting off and kind of going up and around. You're going to know that there's definitely been some deer cruising through the area. So a lot of times, scat is a really good way of noticing deer in the area. You can tell this is pretty fresh. Grazers, scat is going to be kind of these round, soft sort of pellets. Carnivores, not always, but typically, it's going to be filled with a lot of hair. They're going to have twisted ends. They're going to have a lot of hair in their scat. Why do you guys think carnivores have hair in their scat? Do you have an idea?
Because they eat other things and they don't like take the hair off them.
Exactly. They eat the whole thing. So you're going to see a lot of twisted hairs. Sometimes our fox can actually eat a few other things, and so that's not always true, so you want to be aware of that. But usually with scat and carnivores, you're going to see more hair. Grazers are going to be the smaller, round pellets, and it's also a good indication of how fresh the tracks are, how recently that animal has been in the area. So you can see this right here. Obviously, that's had several days to completely dry out to the center. And so you know that it's been a while since that deer's been in the area. And this is kind of true too. You just want to measure it because a lot of times it looks pretty similar. It's a piled poop. Deer versus elk versus moose, depending on the season, can be pretty similar. So just measure the size and you often get a good indication of what it is. All right, so animals themselves are trackers, and they're pretty good at camouflaging in their environment for safety. So can you guys all see the deer on this picture? You found the deer? Okay, can you see any other animals on this picture? Yeah, you can kind of see one over here, and that's actually a coyote. So we know there's human trackers who were here a couple thousand years ago and today present, but animals are also constantly tracking in their environment. They're looking for food and water, they're tracking to be safe, and they're tracking also essentially to find their prey. So you can see the deer kind of notices that coyote back there. So animals themselves are constantly tracking in their environment and making sure that they're staying safe or that they're finding food to be safe. So the next animals that we also have that are pretty big and grazers that seasonally come to the park are these guys. Anyone know what this animal is?
Antelope.
Yeah, pronghorn or antelope's another word for them. So they're really cool animals. They are not really related to any other species in North America, but they're the fastest land animal in North America. They're quick, they're agile, they're really fascinating to watch run. They're usually in kind of smaller groups, so you'll see several at a time out and about and grazing. As you're driving back and forth along the park, you'll probably see some as you're coming through, especially as you're heading towards Arco. I usually find a lot in the fields out there. So true or false, pronghorn are excellent jumpers. Ooh, I hear some falses and trues. We got split here. So it's actually false. They are terrible at jumping. They try and it does not work. Usually when they come up to a fence, they refuse to jump. They try to get underneath it. And deer will come. Deer are usually only a tiny bit bigger than them, and they'll easily just jump, clear the fence, get across. You think that they physically could jump, but they just have never needed to jump. They're so fast, they've been able to essentially outrun everything that could be possibly a predator. And because it's typically flat, you find them in the sagebrush areas, there's not too many things they need to jump over. Climb maybe, but jump, no. So what happened out here is, I promise this is the least gruesome photo I could find. It gets pretty bad, but we obviously knew pronghorn were migrating in and out of the park. But we didn't really realize there was a problem, so we started finding a lot of hurt pronghorn in the fence. And this is kind of when the resource team stepped in, because we were realizing there's a lot of issues with pronghorn crossing fence lines. So obviously the national park is trying to protect these animals, but animals don't follow fences. They're always kind of moving in and out, and especially the pronghorn, they're migrating. So they're moving back and forth across these fences at least 2 times a year. And so we did a very intense, highly technical form of tracking for these pronghorn. So these ones right here, you can see they're usually traveling in a group of them. They often will be in groups of maybe about 5 to 10, depending on the season. But what happens is they're running along and they kind of get in a little bit of a bottleneck next to the fence. They're all trying to fit and jam themselves underneath. So what we did is we wanted to figure out what were the exact fence lines that these pronghorn were trying to get across, trying to go underneath. And so we did that by radio collaring a lot of them in the park. So we radio collared quite a few pronghorn, and we wanted to track where their migration was. What were the fences they were going under? What were the areas that they're passing to and from during their seasonal migration periods? So what we were able to do is we were able to find a lot of those fence lines and change them. So we found out which particular fences they were often going through, and we were able to maybe take the fence down, or, if it was private land or another land agency, we were able to change and adapt the fence a little bit. So did you guys notice anything different about this fence? Yes, there's no barbed wire on the bottom. So for whatever reason they're choosing to go under, they get caught a lot less as they're trying to slide and scoot under there. So you can see that it's a lot easier. It's not going to get caught on its back. It can slip through and very quickly. So the other thing is a little bit hard to see, but it's actually moved up a little bit. So pronghorn fence is going to be about 18 inches off the ground. So it's going to be a little bit higher than the traditional barbed wire fence. And so this is the kind of fence that worked really well because it kept cows out but let pronghorn through. So some agencies own some of the land around here, but a lot of them are private ownerships that have cattle grazing through the area. So this kind of worked for both sides. It let the pronghorn through, but it also kept the animals that weren't supposed to be on NPS land kind of in their own pastures and grazing areas. So this is kind of a map of some of the fences that we are trying to replace and fix. So Craters of the Moon is down right here, and then this is that highway that comes through. And the park actually extends up beyond the highway. So this is what we call the north end of the park. And And so all of these colors are basically pieces of the fence line that we're trying to replace or we have replaced. So this has been going on for a couple of years, and we've been able to replace actually quite a bit of the fence line in this area, and definitely the fence line in the spots where we found that they're frequently migrating in and out through the area. So by intensively tracking these animals, we were really able to help their migration and help them safely get from one place to another and protect them as they travel in and out of Critter Zoo. So the last animal that we're going to talk about tonight is one of my favorites. Does anyone know what this little critter is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an American pika. So these critters are a lot of fun. They're very elusive. I've tried to take pictures of them all summer. I have one so far. So with these guys, they're a little bit different because they're mostly living out on the lava fields. So you're not really going to find footprints of them anywhere. So we're going to kind of think about how to look for these guys as they're kind of living out on the lava fields. So they're very interesting. They live here year-round, and they don't do well in the heat. And they usually are living at high elevation. So living at craters is very, very unique. They've adapted to this area. Essentially, the lava flow provides this unique space for them where they crawl down into the cracks. It's very, very cool, so they can stay cool during the day. They don't do well above 80, 85 degrees, so getting down underneath all of these cracks can help them stay cool during the day. And then at night, or during the winter, the cracks actually act as kind of an insulator. The snow falls down around the lava fields, and it acts as kind of an insulator around these tiny little burrows that they found underneath these cracks in the lava fields. So to prepare for winter, they don't actually hibernate. So if they're not hibernating, they need to be eating something all year long. So true or false, pika dry their food out in the sun before storing it for winter. I might have given that away a little bit, but yeah, so they don't hibernate. They're awake. They're kind of hanging out in their little dens underneath the rock. And so they have to have food to eat. So what they do is all during the summer, they actually will run around and they'll gather up all these grasses and shrubs. And you can see this one, it's got a mouthful of them. So they kind of bite them off at the stem and they'll carry them back